Hello everyone, welcome back to Passive Wrappings again. My name is Steven Strazian, bringing you visual artists and designers in the South Shore and Greater Boston community. Today I have Kate Hayes-Huer, who is a designer and student of design thinking.
Yes.
I think is an appropriate way to describe you.
Yeah, that's appropriate.
All right, so talking about design, when did you first start getting interested in design?
Well, I always kind of had an interest in design. I grew up kind of I was in high school in the late 90s, early 2000s, kind of spent a lot of time on the internet and sort of on social media as it was just sort of starting to form. So I did a lot of my own graphics for sites like LiveJournal and MySpace and all that. But I didn't really consider it a career trajectory while I was in high school. I ended up going to Savannah College of Art and Design, but I had no idea what I wanted to do when I went there. So I started out majoring in sequential art. I changed to illustration. By the time I changed my major to graphic design, I had to withdraw from school. So it was a few years later when I transferred to Bridgewater State University to finish my degree that I chose graphic design as a concentration. And that's when I really fell in love with it and kind of accepted that design came easily to me and it was something that I was passionate about.
Mm-hmm. So when you say sequential art, just because certain people probably doesn't know what that means.
It's comic books,
Mm-hmm.
yeah. And I think at the time, I just wasn't ready to go to college. I guess I could look at it as a missed opportunity, but it was a series of learning experiences for me.
How old were you when you went to Savannah?
I was 18.
Okay, so when you ended up going back to finish your degree, how old were you then?
23?
Okay.
Yes.
All right. So did it seem different when you went back the second time? Because you say when you went back, you could really tell that design was something that came more naturally to you.
I sort of chose graphic design because I felt it was practical at the time. My concentration initially was crafts, which ended up being hand weaving and textiles. So I chose graphic design kind of as a safer field of study. And it was something, I don't know why I kind of had been avoiding it for so long. I guess I just felt it was kind of the easy way out, but that was just because it just felt natural to me.
One of the pieces that you brought for us today was a calendar piece. Mm-hmm. Now, this piece is from 2011.
Yeah.
And do you want to explain the artistic choices that you made here? There's a real loose kind of sketch style to this.
When I went to SCAD, I sort of, even though I bounced across different kind of majors, I started to kind of find my artistic voice. And one of the things that I really kind of fell in love with was plants and ecology. So I took this opportunity to kind of, I illustrated these plants by hand, and I did some research into what was in season in Southeast Massachusetts during the 4 seasons of the year. So I illustrated that all by pen. I scanned it in. I did the lettering by hand, and I kind of wanted to give it like a printmaking quality, even though it ended up being printed out on an inkjet. But that even though it's an older project, it's one of my favorite things that I've done. And I really like to include, I like to include the natural world in my design work because it's something that is also close to my heart. And I like having a handmade quality to any work that I do, even if it is computer generated.
So was the initial idea for this that it would be, everything would be done by hand, and then later you transitioned it into computer work?
I kind of knew where I wanted to go with this project. And at the beginning, I did some sketches of the plants themselves. Mm-hmm. And then I drew them in ink, and I ended up scanning each one into into Photoshop, and then when I was an illustrator, I kind of placed them along the page. So I kind of had a vision for this project in my mind before I did it.
Now, with this strap here, this looks like something I'm going to guess probably wouldn't be able to be done with machine as far as the binding goes. That's something that
Right.
would have to be done by hand.
Right, yeah. Yeah, I bought these little metal brads, and I felt that gave it more of a tactile quality. I was imagining somebody maybe selling this at a farmer's market, kind of like a boutique type product.
Now, this is something also that a lot of people sometimes don't think about when they're, well, a lot of clients I've noticed don't think about this when it comes to these sort of designs. They have to plan ahead for certain things that would have to be done by hand versus
Right.
certain things that can be done
Right.
by machine. And it seemed like this piece, because it was had a very handmade quality,
Yeah.
that from the beginning that wasn't really a concern with this piece that it would
Right.
have to be done by hand.
Right, this would
Seems
definitely
like
be
that
a
would be part
small
of it.
batch, limited edition type deal.
As we go through these, I can see what you were talking about when you were talking about different plants that were in season during the different times of year that are displayed here. And there people can get a little better quality of the hand craftsmanship there that you did all by hand, right? You said it was all scanned in.
Right, yeah, all the illustrations and the lettering for the months I drew with pen and scanned it in. And this is this kind of thing I still love. I love kind of local ecology and farmers markets and locally grown. I I like those ties to the natural world and the community. So that's why I wanted to share this project, because that's kind of been a little bit of where I'm going with my work as a graduate student, and in my day job, that sort of theme comes up over and over again.
Now, what is your day job right now?
So I'm actually an administrative assistant at Massasoit Community College in the Division of Science and Mathematics. And a lot of the work that they do there with their STEM research program relates to local ecology and ecosystems. And being around that kind of work has been super interesting for me. It's just been a really great thing to see day to day. And we also have a big edible garden right outside my office, which is just incredible.
Because it seems like your current position now actually interacts with some of the artwork that we're about to look at.
Yeah, so some of that I did actually produce, even though I'm an admin assistant. I do have the opportunity to incorporate my design skills to do some projects in our division.
So one of those pieces is this one that we have up right now. And this is the piece of Massasoit. Now, your official capacity isn't as a art designer, but
Right.
this is one of the pieces that you've produced for Massasoit.
Right, and that's one of the reasons I really love my job, is because I get to work closely with the research interns, and if they need a project like this done, then I'm there to assist. So every year we have what we call the STEMposium, where our research interns show off their research posters, and their main project has been on pollinator ecology. So they wanted to make this kind of informational poster to visually convey this kind of scientific information in a very accessible way. So these bee photos are actually from the U.S. Geological Survey. And then the data, the interns gave me basically the information, and then I sourced the photos, and I made the little title with little bees around the lettering. And I set it up for print and everything like that. But it's one of the projects that I really like, because I get to see it around campus, and I feel it just makes me happy when I see it. So yeah, that was a lot of fun to work on.
Here we get a closer image of how you're working with the image and the text here.
Yeah, so these posters are huge when they're printed out. I think I don't remember the dimensions offhand, but they're the same size as the research posters. So when we have our symposia, people that are visiting maybe from off campus, or people that maybe aren't familiar with research, they can look at that first and kind of get an overview before they move on to the really science jargon heavy research posters that the students have worked on, which by the way are very impressive, especially for community college students.
So to contextualize this, what is the symposium for? What do people do at the symposium?
The students get to present their research posters, which if you've ever seen a scientific research poster, it's kind of just this huge poster with a ton of text and maybe a few photos on it.
Yeah, it's not good.
Right.
That's my opinion, but
I'm
also right.
I do also have a chance to help the students tweak their posters so they look more palatable. I like to make sure that their text is all the same size, everything's lined up, their graphs are in the right format. So stuff like that, since I already kind of like science, that's been really fun for me. And our students are actually traveling to New Orleans in a couple of weeks to present their research posters, which is very exciting.
This brings up an interesting question. When the students are approaching their scientific posters, what are some of the big mistakes that you tend to see among them? I mean, there's the big walls of text that you mentioned.
You know, I think in general they're high quality to begin with. I think that the students that came before them, even before I started working there, kind of set a higher standard, and the faculty that have been helping the students kind of come from this research background. But I have walked through the halls at other schools and seen their posters, and that's when I kind of realized how great our work is. Yeah.
Well, you're the second guest that I've had that's actually worked at Massasoit.
Oh, okay.
And Massasoit, I will say, has a pretty good standard for its art and design work,
Nice.
given that it's a community college.
Right, our communications and graphics and marketing team is very high caliber. And even though I'm an administrative assistant, I like to definitely kind of hold myself to the same standard when I do my quote-unquote fluff posters and brochures and stuff like that.
So I did want to just zoom in on the title part here because, again, I'm seeing the kind of loose handwork in the design that we saw in the last piece, which seems to be a theme that emerges in your work that I noticed.
Yeah, I didn't draw that correlation before, but yeah, you're right. I always try to include kind of like a little hand-drawn element whenever I'm doing anything. I like to keep things high quality, but kind of playful, I guess. I don't like when things are too serious. We have enough of that in the world.
No, I've found that as well in my own work, that I don't notice certain themes that are emerging in my work until other people point them out to me.
Yeah.
So I think that that's a general thing that happens with a lot of designers.
Yeah.
Now, you're bringing up a lot of the academic work that goes on at Massasoit, but you yourself right now are a master's student.
Yes.
And when I introduced you, I believe that I said that you were a student of design thinking.
Yes.
Which is a term that I'm seeing thrown around a lot right now in not only design, but in business and even in the social sciences now.
Yes.
And so how would you define design thinking?
So from what I've learned and the information that I have read myself and kind of synthesized, design thinking it's not one thing. But it is a collection of methods or a framework that can be used to solve complex problems, and primarily does so by empathizing and understanding stakeholders and users, really looking at the systems that have caused a particular problem to occur, and ideating solutions. And so there's different frameworks for design thinking. I think the most popular probably come from the Stanford D School and IDEO. In my MFA program at Radford, the framework that we primarily focus on is Innovating for People, which is a book of human-centered design practices from the Luma Institute. So their way of doing design thinking is a little bit more simple. It's a collection of methods that include looking, understanding, and making. And then those methods can kind of be combined into different recipes that we call implementation plans to look at and start beginning to solve a problem.
So this sounds like it really interacts with a lot of the things that maybe if you're not in the design field, you don't know are going on, but a lot of sort of the in Europe they use the term service design a lot more than we use here in America.
Right.
Here, design thinking is probably the more popular term.
Right, and I think it's kind of achieved a little bit of a buzzword status. And I think a lot of that has, I think that will eventually die down, but I think design thinking is used a lot and it's diluted. It kind of used as a marketing ploy. But I think really understanding how design thinking works and the different ways that these frameworks can be tweaked and different recipes can be made. I think some people do use it kind of because it's the next great thing, even though it's been around for a while. But there's a lot of really great and interesting work going on in the design thinking field. And as you had mentioned, it's being used a lot in business. In my program, there aren't a lot of design students. I can only think of a few others in my program that I've come across that have kind of an art or design background. So it's really drawing in people from different disciplines, and it's been interesting to work with people that don't have that design background as well.
This raises a question, because before we were looking at some of your stuff, which your work that was very textual, it was very much done by hand, it was very visual. And now you've kind of moved into this area that's a lot more conceptual in terms of design.
Right.
So when was it that you started making the move from doing, I guess what we call more, what people would think of as graphic design into this area of design thinking?
So I mean, I think I mentioned in so many words that I had no idea what I wanted to do with my life. I knew I wanted to go to art school. I didn't know what I wanted to study. Actually, going back to school for a second time, I was debating between studying ecology and finishing my art degree. And in that period of time, when I was working and thinking about going back to school, I ended up learning about permaculture, which is kind of I'm trying to think of a quick definition for it, but permaculture is basically a method of design for ecology and landscaping and sustainability. And when I did my permaculture design training, that's when I really learned that design meant so much more than just graphic design. And I kind of had that in the back of my mind. When I finished my degree at Bridgewater State, I also got pretty heavily involved working at the GLBTA Pride Center, and I developed this kind of passion for social justice, but I had no idea how to synthesize wanting to change the world and doing design. So it took me a few years before I kind of discovered design thinking, and I was like, wait a minute, this brings everything that I love together, so I want to learn more about it.
Yeah, I think actually from the last piece that we were looking at, I think that it's not hard to understand that you have an interest in permaculture, which is a way, I would describe it as sort of an attempt through design of developing a permanent culture that you could stay in a certain place for long periods of time.
Right.
Usually that's applied to things like food production for certain reasons that's really fundamental to people's lives.
Right.
But I think that it's, I've noticed this where a lot of people who go into sort of design research areas are influenced by permaculture right now.
Yeah.
And what right now are some of the projects that you're working on in your master's program? And I think maybe we should go back to something you said earlier when you were talking about human-centered design, how that might be part of the work that you're doing right now.
Right. You mean my work as a student?
Your work as a student, right.
So I just finished up my first year in the Radford MFA program. I am doing it part-time because working full-time, it just makes a lot more sense with everything else I have going on. But my most recent course was in social enterprise. And I actually, I drew a lot on my experience learning about permaculture. When I developed a business model for a social enterprise that kind of aimed at community organization and ecological stewardship. And so I've kind of had that more recently in the back of my mind. But the other projects that I have worked on in my first year in the MFA program, we really just started out looking at design thinking and the methods that we're gonna going to use going forward in the program. But we also learned, I took a course in environmental psychology. I did a readings elective where we explored innovation and invention. It's basically been a lot of different things, and everything is human-centered design in our program because we really want to empathize with users, our stakeholders, people, and that's kind of at the heart of everything.
So you've brought up that you're interested in ecology and social justice issues. Where is it that you hope to apply these design thinking ideas which you're developing right now?
That's the big question, right? So I'm happy where I am for the time being until I finish my degree program. But looking forward, I would like to work in a design firm or start my own, possibly. I think I am at a very, very transitional point in my life where I'm kind of looking at a lot of different things and what's out there and just kind of realizing what's possible and the interesting work other people are doing that I would also like to be a part of. So I'm just kind of keeping my eyes open for different trajectories, I guess.
I would say that there was, what you're saying sort of parallels some of what I found when I finished my BFA program. Part of actually the final project that I was doing when I was doing my undergraduate work at Lesley University involved research related to design and actually coming up with measurable ways of seeing the effectiveness of design. And I think that you're right that right now it's a lot of these sort of research areas in design are emergent right now, and it's not easy to tell exactly where they're going.
Right.
And so I don't know if design thinking is something, well, I know it applies to business right now. I know it's really big, and I know they're starting to apply it in research.
Right.
So I think your interest is sort of moving it, well, I don't know if you're thinking of moving it into the sort of nonprofit area, but I guess you're not really ready to say for sure where you would apply those skills.
I mean, just because of who I am as a person, I guess I'm not so much drawn towards the business and capital generating aspect.
Do you think that a lot of the other students in your program are? Because you say that a lot of them don't come from a design background.
I think that they might be. I mean, it's hard to really get to know people when you do an online course. But I think everybody's kind of coming from a different place, but I feel like there have been quite a few times where I feel kind of out of place as somebody that really wants to do this kind of social justice, equity-oriented work. And for me, it's kind of been like a struggle between, like, yeah, that's what I want to do, but also I have this massive amount of student loan debt. Like, how do we negotiate the system? So that's, I mean, at this point, I'm just kind of waiting to see where life takes me. But I'm trying to build up my body of work to a point where I'm confident in what I can do and what I want to do.
When it comes to your body of work, I actually have another one of these, this is a poster as well, correct?
Yeah, it's another
that you
fluff
produced,
poster.
Probably for the same reasons as the bee poster, am I correct?
Yeah, so this is another, this was for our most recent STEMposium. This photo was taken outside in one of our sustainable landscaping areas at Massasoit at the Brockton campus. And it was taken by Professor Melanie Teresa King, who is one of our full-time biology faculty. And it's a photo of a honeybee and a painted lady butterfly pollinating on the same plant. So one of our faculty members had the idea to call it Pollination Collaboration, and that's the poster. So it's kind of fun, lighthearted, but again, it's sort of making science visual and accessible to what might be a new audience.
So what kind of feedback have you gotten on these posters, if any? I don't know, because sometimes when you're the designer, you actually aren't the one who's getting the feedback, so it's kind of hard to tell. So I don't know if you've gotten any of these, because these are displayed in a very public way, in a very educational way as well.
Yeah, people love the posters. One thing kind of being an admin assistant slash who does graphic design, I don't work with any designers. So I would like to have that kind of design feedback. Sometimes I feel like something might need work, but nobody really knows how to articulate that in kind of a critique kind of way. But yeah, the feedback has been good, and I feel like my work has in some small way kind of helped our STEM research program look good. And we've had requests to have these posters printed out in kind of like smaller sizes on cardstock, just really happy.
You know, you touch on a personal issue that you're having here when it comes to getting feedback. And I know how that is sometimes when you're the only designer who's working on a particular piece. I got a project I'm working on right now. My client told me they have to go bring it to their team, and I have a lot of worry about what that means.
The team?
Exactly, who the team is. So
yeah.
Is this something, so I think, do you miss maybe when you were back in school?
Oh my God, so much.
The sort of critiques that you would have when you were doing your undergraduate work?
I do.
Versus what you probably have to do with now being the only designer who's actually working on these pieces.
Yeah, and honestly, I don't know a lot of designers in my personal life either, and I know I could do more to kind of be a part of these networks. But yeah, at the time, critiques were nerve-wracking and terrifying when I was in school, and now I look back, I'm like, man, that was part of the process, and it was so helpful. And I wish I could do that every time I did anything. So yeah, if you're an undergrad and you're dreading that critique day, you know, no one's going to crucify you. Just that feedback is going to help you grow and become a better artist and designer.
I think it's important because you brought up the fact that when you first went to art school, you were 18, and a lot of people, when they go in that young, a lot of them are really enthusiastic, but they don't like being criticized, and that's extremely important to the process.
Yeah, and that's sort of why I bounce between majors, because I mean, comics are cool in theory, but when it came to drawing them, I was terrible. I didn't possess that talent for drawing, which I think maybe most people can cultivate that, but my heart wasn't in it. I was stressed out. I wasn't ready for college, and I would just skip class on critique days. So it was extremely stressful for me. So if your heart is in something and you care about your work improving, show up to critique day with something, because you'll appreciate it.
Yeah, it's really bad when somebody shows up and they don't have anything, because
it's the worst.
Because I'm thinking about certain people that I can remember, but one of the things is you want to be able to produce a lot of work, and you really want to be able to take a lot of criticism for it, is what I always found. And I don't know if between the two undergraduate schools you went to, if they did it any differently, but I think with the sequential art, that it requires a lot of illustration, and if you're not really interested in drawing, it's not something that you want to invest a lot of time in learning how to do, it's probably not.
And I mean,
a good idea.
I made it through drawing 1, 2, and 3. I made it through life drawing, and I changed my major to illustration. And I in my personal opinion, still, I was terrible. So critique days were, I mean, I think they pulled fewer punches when I was in art school versus when I went to BSU. But I mean, I think it really depends on the instructor and how seriously your classmates take their work. But it's definitely an experience depending on those factors.
What do you think stressed you out so much when it came to the critiques?
You put yourself in this very vulnerable position, I think, and to me, like, my art just felt very private, and I didn't really want to share it with anyone, even though that was like the whole point. And like, I just didn't think I was very good, and there were people whose work I didn't think was that great, but they blossomed into these really good artists. The more work they put into it, but I just didn't have that love for it at the time, I guess.
One of the pieces that you brought today, and I'd like to explain why you brought this particular piece, because it does sit outside of the sort of normal commercial realm that you've been part of.
Yeah.
So if we bring that up on the screen, right now. This is some of the weaving, which you did mention earlier in passing.
So when I went to Bridgewater State and when I originally chose my crafts concentration, I chose metals because I thought it sounded really cool. When I got into the metal
That's a very
studio,
good reason to choose a major, by the way.
yeah, right, it's metal. So when I got into the studio, I liked it at first, but when it came time for me to work with the torch, that was kind of always going off in my hand. It was terrifying to me. And that sort of drove me away, and it prompted me to maybe choose another craft. And I think I talked a little bit about how I like to draw things by hand and have that tactile quality. So that's kind of my interest in crafts, was like just this interest in having a skill like that. So when I learned weaving, hand weaving at Bridgewater State, like I absolutely fell in love with it. And so weaving kind of draws together my interests again. There's a lot of planning, there's a lot of design, there's a little bit of math, and it's just such a cool thing to have woven cloth with your own hands. To me, it was just really fun to do. So this project, I hand wove, selected the materials, and
What are the materials?
It's made of tencel, which is a cellulose-based yarn, as well as cotton, I believe. So this is actually a shibori. So the pattern is woven with these strings in it. The strings are then pulled to kind of scrunch up the fabric, and then when it's dyed, it takes on that pattern. So you can kind of see it has this orange and green pattern on it. So I chose these colors based on a Frank Frazetta painting, which was his cover for Edgar Rice Burroughs' A Princess of Mars, which kind of ties together the fact that I'm a nerd. But so this is actually a series of 3 scarves that were hand woven and dyed using that color scheme. And it's something that, hand weaving is still something that I enjoy doing, and it kind of the ethos of it sort of influences my work as a designer.
How long does it take to weave a piece like this?
So these 3 scarves were made during what I think was a 5-week summer course. So between planning, choosing the materials, selecting the dyes, and just preparing everything, I would say probably a couple weeks. I mean, at least at my pace. There are professional weavers that do things more quickly, but when you're kind of learning how to do the whole process, it takes a little longer.
Is weaving something that you would go back to anytime in the future?
So I actually have a very big 4-shaft countermarch loom in my apartment.
I have no idea what that means.
It's a big ass loom.
Okay.
And I do have a smaller loom as well, and it's something that I really need to find the time to actually do, but I do have the equipment to do it. It just needs to be restored a little bit.
Why did you go into the current administrative position that you have?
It was, for me, at my previous position, I was making very little money, and honestly, it was a moment of desperation where I was applying to every single job that I could find. I mean, of course, I was applying to design jobs. I was keeping my portfolio up, but I had tons of interviews, but I didn't end up landing anything. And this was kind of this was my first full-time job since I graduated from Bridgewater State University. Until then, I was doing freelance graphic design work. I was doing kind of these random gigs, and I was working part-time at Bridgewater State. But in my capacity as an admin assistant, I feel like my coworkers and my supervisor they knew what my skill set was, and that's why they wanted me, because they wanted to innovate in their division and kind of do new things. They knew that I had this kind of literacy with computers and design work, and that's what they wanted, and that's something that I've really appreciated in my time there. It was not just, I don't get to be a designer, but I'm designing a workflow for myself. I'm designing kind of printed and web stuff as we need it, and I'm working. Sometimes I get to work with our communications and marketing department, and I speak their language. So I really like it, even though it kind of on paper, the job description is basically for a secretary, but we were doing so much more, and it's been really great.
So for a lot of younger people who might be watching right now, might be interested in going to the field of design, you're sort of an interesting transition state, I think, particularly because you're interested in going to a field design that's really rapidly developing.
Yeah.
So what kind of advice would you give to them if they were interested in pursuing this, I think it would be fair to say, more conceptual, more systematic way of looking at design?
Right.
There's a lot of systems thinking involved in design thinking.
I don't know if I would take advice from me. I mean, my path I appreciate my path and where it's taken me, and I like where I am right now, but it was so hard. I mean, I was really in survival mode between when I graduated with my undergraduate degree and now. But my advice would be to definitely network as much as possible. We have some great design conferences in the Boston area, which you can go to for free or for reduced tuition because of your status as a student. I mean, the Boston area is one of the greatest places in the world to get an education. We have MIT, Harvard, blah, blah, blah. But even we're doing great work at our community colleges as well. So I don't think there's a wrong place to start. And I think you need to look around and see what resources are around you, which is something that I'm still trying to do as a 30-something online grad student who's basically a secretary. Is I recently went to the Interventions Design Conference, which was held by Scout at Northeastern, and I felt super out of place as somebody who's not a traditional student and doesn't know anybody, but going to those panels and kind of exposing myself to what is happening currently in design and design research and design ethics, that was huge for me. So I think just expose yourself to as much of what is happening as possible and stay in that conversation.
So, just because you mentioned this, I'm really tempted to ask you about design ethics. And because that's, I imagine, there are a lot of ethical issues involved in this sort of design thinking that
absolutely.
you're working in.
Yeah, I mean, I think sometimes people don't realize the power they have as designers. When you see something, when you think that something is not working properly, or you think that something is, maybe you're in a parking lot that you can't get out of, or something like that, you think, oh man, no one designed this. Well, somebody designed it, and it's bad design, and that's their responsibility. So
I think there you're touching on what design thinking really is about, because a lot of what you're talking about, people design things without really thinking about the fact they're designing.
Right, exactly, and I think design thinking acknowledges the fact that you have this responsibility to do things right, and it's going to be your work, and you're going to put it into the world, and you need to look at all the issues in place, and you need to make sure that you're not kind of replicating the things that made a problem happen in the first place. So I think that it's important to look at these kind of bigger systems as well as the smaller systems that happen as the result of a problem.
And I think one of the issues I kind of have with design thinking is because, and I'm going to get a little nerdy here for some of the people at home, a lot of design really, the sort of program that you're in, a lot of these upper level design programs emerged before, for instance, you have design thinking, you have design studies, you have design anthropology. Mm-hmm. These emerged first, usually before there was a really well-established system in place. Right. It's different from a lot of other fields where, for instance, biology fully emerged as a science before it really became something you could study at a sort of high level.
Yeah.
With design, it sort of happened the other way around, and it caused a lot of confusion. And I think only now, I think there's a certain academic consensus emerging around what these fields actually are and how to apply them. Yeah.
From what I understand, there is not a huge consensus.
Well, I said it's only just emerging.
Right.
We're really at the early stages of a lot of
Right,
that kind of approach to design, which traditionally isn't an academic field.
Yeah, and I think that should be articulated a little bit more clearly to students, honestly. Because of my own interest in design thinking and its implications and the processes and even its history, I've done a lot of research into design theory and stuff, but that material isn't covered in our courses so far. But it's something I really feel like I need to develop an understanding of on my own time. And I'm not sure everybody is really getting that. So I definitely agree that it's an emergent field. And my school, Radford University, I mean, it's not Stanford or MIT or any of those. It's a state school, which is where I came from, and I'm very proud of that. But I think that students need to hold themselves to as high a standard as they can and really just understand and educate themselves about what design is, their responsibilities as a designer, and where we're going.
So I think it'd be fair, and you can correct me if you disagree with my characterization, because earlier we were talking about those sort of critique sessions and how what seemed to have been throwing you off and what seems to throw certain other people off is the fact that you have to produce an awful lot of work for people to be able to critique and for people to be able to compare and to explain. I think explain what the actual strengths and weaknesses are of them, of the pieces are structurally.
Yeah.
And I think design thinking is trying to take that process and apply it to sort of larger problems outside of the visual medium.
Yeah, I mean, that's basically what it is, and that's why I was drawn to it when I began to appreciate and miss those critiques. I was like, well, why don't we critique everything? Why don't we design everything as if we were a graphic designer, which I think is sort of, that's the shtick of design thinking. It's like, think like a designer. People trying to break the model of kind of running a business. So yeah.
And I think part of the issue that a lot of people who are working in design thinking are having is really communicating and really showing how those processes can be used, particularly to people who don't come from that kind of a background. Because one thing I would say to a lot of the people here who might be new to the visual arts is it's really important, I think, to produce a lot of work and to sort of put it out there and to not be bothered by the criticism in the way that I mean, certain, particularly younger people, when they first start out, are.
Yeah, everyone wants to be perfect from the get-go, and if they're not, they think they're terrible.
Right. And so with design thinking, you want to try, and part of it also, I think, is because really to apply it properly, people are worried also about the level of investment that's going to be needed.
Right.
So I think that's also an issue.
Yeah.
If people want to know, first because we're on the subject of design thinking, where should they, I assume that, well, I know that you have work that's actually available for people to take a look at, to get an idea of what your interests are in your master's program. Maybe it'll give them more of an idea of the kind of questions that design thinking is looking at.
So I do have some of my student work up on the, if you search for Radford MFA Design Thinking and you click my name, I do have some projects on there. You can also see what my classmates have been working on. And you can see how different students have different kinds of approaches to solving problems and looking at them and understanding them. There's so many resources available on design thinking. A really big one for me is just kind of been reading articles on Medium, reading...
Medium it's medium.com, right?
Yes. I follow a lot of designers and design students on Twitter and just kind of lurk there and see what people are talking about. And I also take advantage of my Radford University's resources through their library, and I do read a lot of academic papers. But for the layman, there are some great books out there. I definitely recommend Innovating for People by Luma as a primer for that type of design thinking. But there's lots of stuff out there, yeah.
What are some of the other projects what are some of the other interests that some of your fellow students have?
I'm trying to think. There are a lot of teachers that are actually in the program, and yeah, there's instructors, there's business people. I think there might be a few programmers. And again, you only get to learn so much about your classmates. I recently actually did a collaboration studio course, which was really interesting, working with 2 other people remotely over a semester to work on a project, which ended up, because we all kind of worked in different roles in higher ed, we ended up kind of zoning in on higher ed to focus our project on, and we ended up looking at what an AI assistant for students would look like. And I know there's plenty of them out there, but we really tried to refine where we wanted to go with that. But I think just learning to work with other people over on the internet was very educational in and of itself, yeah.
I'm interested to hear that there's so much focus on education in design thinking right now, or in your program, at least in particular.
Yeah.
And how do you feel about the actual interactions, since a lot of these are online? Do you think that you have as rich an experience as you would in person?
I think you have to make that experience rich. And I think being an online student anywhere, you really kind of have to make the best of it. And one of the things that we talked about, we did a lot of video chat, and we also talked all the time. We had our own Slack, so we messaged each other a lot and kind of sent each other sketches and files and stuff like that. But we were all talking about how we wish that we could just get together in real life and and just kind of put everything out on a table and discuss it that way. So yeah, it's hard. And I miss that, and I would like to definitely have that face-to-face interaction, but in an online course, it's not really possible.
So if people want to see more of the kind of work that we were able to show here tonight, you also have a place where they can see that work as well?
Yeah, so a lot of my portfolio still includes my older kind of student work. I do freelance work. I do a lot of WordPress websites and occasionally do logos and stuff like that. I didn't include that in my portfolio, but I am looking into remaking kind of my own website and doing personal branding and stuff like that. But I do have a Behance page. It is behance.net/mxkate, and I really kind of cherry-picked what I think is my best work, and I put it on there. But right now, as you said, most of my work is very conceptual. So a lot of it is, I do hope to get more of it up on the Radford website, but a lot of it is just kind of in my Google Drive.
Okay. Well, hopefully a lot of that stuff will get up on the Radford website soon, so we'll be able to take a look at it.
Yeah, yeah.
So, Kate, I want to thank you for coming out today.
Thanks for
telling us about
inviting
design
me.
thinking and showing us your work.
Yeah.
And is there anything you want to leave the viewers with that you haven't gotten to say so far?
So in my work, I do get to speak a lot with students directly, and I find that a lot of them get discouraged. Maybe they're failing a class. Maybe they've lost some time in their program or whatever. I've had a very messy path to get where I am now, and I'm okay. So I definitely want people to know that no matter what happens, if you just keep doing what you feel is right and what is best for you and the others around you, you'll do okay. And yeah.
All right, Kate. Well, thank you for coming out here today. And I just want to let everyone out there know that you can get in contact with us here at the Passive Wrappings at contact@fireintheminddesign.com. I want to thank Randolph Community Television for helping us shoot today. And everybody, keep those fires of creativity burning.